The first weapon never reached Earth. It wasn't intercepted. No explosion marked its failure. No defense grid lit up to stop it. The beam simply slowed. What had been launched as a relativistic strike, capable of tearing continents apart, bled velocity in silence, as if something unseen had reached into the laws of physics and gently pressed against it. On every screen aboard the Dominion flagship, the trajectory line curved, not toward Earth, but back. Admiral Verac watched without blinking as the beam completed an impossible arc and struck the destroyer that had fired it. The ship vanished in a white pulse, so clean it looked edited out of reality. For a moment, there was no sound on the bridge, no alarms, no panic, just absence. Then every console lit up at once. A message appeared across all command channels simultaneously. Navigation, weapons, internal systems, even the isolated quantum cores that were supposed to be immune to interference. Command authority transferred. The words were written in perfect Dominion script. That was the first thing that made it wrong. The second was that no one on the ship had issued the command. Override, Verac said calmly, his voice cutting through the stillness. His officers moved instantly, fingers dancing across interfaces that had never failed in 3,000 years of conquest. The Dominion did not lose control of its systems. It did not make mistakes. It did not encounter resistance it could not crush. Nothing responded. Weapons remained locked. Shields flickered as if waiting for permission to exist. Even the ship's core began to throttle down, as though obeying a master no one could see. Source, Verac demanded. Unknown, his tactical officer replied, but there was something in the tone, a fracture, subtle but unmistakable. It's not coming from the planet. It's everywhere. That made no sense. The Dominion had studied Earth for cycles. A fractured world. Hundreds of competing governments. Technology scattered across incompatible systems. No unified defense. No coordinated command structure. Their greatest strength, according to every model, was their unpredictability, and even that had been categorized as inefficiency, primitive, disorganized, loud, harmless. Verac stepped closer to the central display, where Earth rotated in silence, blue and green and deceptively calm. No fleets rose to meet them. No weapons fired in defiance. No shield shimmered into existence. The planet did nothing. And yet, his fleet had just lost a war it hadn't started. Restore manual control, he ordered. Cut external interfaces. Isolate all systems. The command should have worked. Dominion ships were designed with redundancies layered upon redundancies, each one capable of severing external influence. Entire civilizations had tried to breach their systems. None had succeeded. This time, the isolation protocols initiated and then stopped halfway, as if something had already decided they were no longer allowed. A new transmission came through, overriding every frequency at once. No encryption, no distortion. Just a single human voice, calm to the point of indifference. You should not have tested it. The translator processed the words instantly. The tone carried no fear, no urgency, no anger. That was wrong, too. Verac felt something unfamiliar press against the edges of his thoughts. Not fear, not yet, but distortion of expectation. Every model, every simulation, every historical precedent said this moment should belong to him. The invader speaks. The prey responds. But Earth had not responded. It had acted. What do we test? Verac asked, not because he expected an answer, but because silence felt suddenly dangerous. For a fraction of a second, nothing came back. Then the same voice returned, softer this time, almost reflective. Ownership. Across the fleet. Systems continue to shift, not violently, not chaotically, but with quiet certainty. Targeting arrays recalibrated themselves. Navigation routes rewrote. Entire ships drifted out of formation as if guided by invisible hands. And still, Earth did nothing. No fleets, no weapons, no visible defense. Just control. Verac's gaze remained fixed on the planet, but his mind had already moved beyond it. If the humans could reach into Dominion systems like this, if they could take control without firing a single shot, then the problem was not what Earth had built. The problem was where it had built it, and how long it had been there. Prepare for manual engagement, he said, though for the first time in his command. The order felt like a guess rather than certainty. If they think they can take our weapons... He did not finish the thought, because deep in the ship's core, something shifted again, not in response to his command, in anticipation of it. For the first time in its recorded history, a Dominion fleet prepared for battle without trusting its own weapons. The order spread quickly, not through the compromised systems, but by voice, officers relaying commands the old way, bypassing networks that no longer belonged to them. Entire decks shifted into manual operation. Ancient redundancies reawakened from ceremonial status into necessity. It was inefficient. It was slow. It was something the Dominion had not needed in over 1,000 campaigns. And yet it worked, partially. Manual targeting is online, the weapons officer reported, his voice tight but controlled. We can fire without system authorization. Do it, Veyrak said. A second shot launched from one of the outer cruisers, this time stripped of guidance protocols, stripped of smart correction systems, reduced to raw force. It tore forward, faster than thought, aimed directly at Earth. For a heartbeat, it held its course. Then space around it distorted. Not violently, not visibly, but subtly, like heat shimmering over glass. The projectile didn't stop. It didn't explode. It simply wasn't where it had been a moment ago. The trajectory vanished from every sensor. A fraction of a second later, the cruiser that had fired it split cleanly in half. No warning, no visible impact, just separation, as if reality itself had decided the ship should no longer be whole. Silence fell again, heavier this time. They're not redirecting the weapons, the tactical officer said slowly, staring at data that refused to align with known physics. They're editing outcomes. That statement should have been impossible. The Dominion did not fear weapons. It did not fear technology. It feared only one thing: unpredictability beyond calculation. Every enemy they had ever faced could be modeled, simulated, reduced to probability curves that guaranteed victory. This had no curve. Veyrak turned away from the display, his mind shifting gears with cold precision. Panic was for lesser species. Confusion was a weakness. There was always a structure beneath chaos, always a system waiting to be understood. Report, he said. Full analysis. Now! The science division responded with hesitation. Another anomaly. Dominion analysts did not hesitate. We are detecting signal interference across all spectrums, the lead analyst began. But it is not originating from a single source. It is distributed, fragmented, embedded in everything. Clarify. A pause. It's inside our own systems, Admiral, not as an intrusion, as if it has always been there. That made no sense. Dominion systems were built in isolation, assembled in controlled environments, shielded from external contamination. Every line of code, every circuit, every quantum core was verified across centuries of refinement. Nothing foreign could exist inside them, unless it hadn't entered from the outside, unless it had been waiting. Veyrak's gaze shifted back to Earth. But this time he wasn't looking at the planet as a target. He was looking at it as a source. Bring up historical data. He ordered all interactions with human space. Every probe, every scan, every observation. The data flooded in, decades of surveillance, thousands of recorded signals, countless passive scans of species that had never once looked back. At least, that's what the Dominion had believed. Focus on anomalies, Veyrak said. At first, there was nothing. Routine transmissions, civilian broadcasts, fragmented languages, chaotic information streams that made no sense to Dominion logic. It had been dismissed as noise. But now, filtered differently, patterns began to emerge. Repetition where there should have been randomness. Structure hidden inside disorder. Signals that overlapped in ways that served no purpose. Unless they weren't meant to be understood. They've been transmitting continuously, the analyst whispered, almost to himself. Not communication. Not exactly. More like distribution. Distribution of what? Another pause, longer this time. We don't know. That was the second time Dominion certainty had failed in the span of minutes. Across the fleet, ships continued to drift out of formation. their systems subtly rewriting themselves, not collapsing, not breaking, changing. Veyrak felt it then. Not fear, not yet, but the edge of something far more dangerous. Doubt. Admiral. A junior strategist spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension. He was young, newly assigned, his record unremarkable except for one thing. He had questioned the initial invasion projections. Speak. When we studied Earth, we classified their communication networks as inefficient, overlapping, redundant, disorganized. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. But what if that wasn't an efficiency? Veyrak did not respond immediately. Continue. What if it was design? The strategist said. What if all that noise was a noise? The idea hung in the air, fragile and dangerous. Because if it was true, then everything the Dominion believed about humanity, about weakness, about disorganization, about technological inferiority, was not just wrong. It was manipulated. Before Veyrak could respond, the human voice returned, cutting through every channel once more. This time, there was something different in it. Not calm. Expectation. You're starting to see it, the voice said. And for the first time since entering Earth's orbit, the Dominion was no longer observing a primitive world. It was being studied in return. The moment the human voice faded, the Dominion fleet did something it had not done in centuries. It stopped advancing. Not out of fear, not yet, but because motion itself had become uncertain. Every calculation, every predictive model that guided their movement now returned conflicting outcomes. The more the systems tried to correct, the more unstable the results became, as if reality around them had developed a preference, and it was not aligned with Dominion intent. Disable predictive guidance entirely, Veyrak ordered. We move by direct calculation only. That alone was an admission of something unspoken. The Dominion's greatest advantage, their ability to foresee and dominate outcomes, was no longer reliable. Across the fleet, ships adjusted. Formation dissolved into individual motion. Clean, perfect geometry gave way to something far more primitive, approximation. And yet, even stripped down to fundamentals, something continued to interfere. Admiral, the lead analyst said, his voice quieter now, stripped of its earlier certainty. We've isolated a pattern. Explain. It's not just in our systems. It's in the space around us. The interference isn't being transmitted from Earth in real time. It's already here. Veyrak's eyes narrowed slightly. That is not an explanation. It's embedded, the analyst continued, in our signal processing layers, in our sensor calibration assumptions, even in the way our systems interpret data. We are not being attacked from the outside. We are interacting with something that has already integrated itself into our operational framework. A slow realization began to take shape. Not fully formed, not yet understood, but unmistakably dangerous. How long? Veyrak asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer, when it came, would redefine the entire situation. Possibly decades, the analyst finally said. Maybe longer. We would need to review all historical contact data, to be certain. The bridge fell silent again, but this time it was different. The silence was not confusion. It was recalibration. The Dominion had not just arrived at Earth. They had walked into something that had been prepared for them. Veyrak turned back to the planetary display. Earth still appeared unchanged, cloud systems drifting, oceans reflecting light, cities glowing faintly along the darkened hemisphere. No visible defenses, no orbital weapons, no sign of the force that was dismantling his fleet from within. And yet, every system aboard his ship was now operating under conditions that had not existed before entering the space. Bring up pre-contact records, he said. All long-range scans prior to fleet deployment. The data surfaced quickly. Archived observations taken from beyond the outer system. Passive scans, minimal interaction. Standard procedure for evaluating a pre-spacefaring civilization. Filter for signal anomalies, Veyrak added. At first, the analysts found nothing of note. Background radiation, natural noise, routine transmissions leaking from Earth's surface, communications, entertainment, fragmented languages layered over each other in chaotic excess. It had always been dismissed as irrelevant. But now, Reprocessed under different assumptions, the data began to shift. Patterns emerged where none had been expected. Not structured like Dominion code, not ordered or efficient, but persistent, self-repeating, redundant across countless frequencies. Signals that overlapped in ways that served no clear communicative purpose. Why would they transmit like this? One analyst murmured. No one answered, because the question itself was flawed. It assumed the transmissions were meant to be understood. Cross-reference with our system architecture, Veyrac said. The comparison began. Seconds passed. Then the first result came in. A match, not direct, not obvious, but there, deep within the foundational layers of Dominion signal interpretation protocols. A fragment, a pattern that should not exist. How is that possible? The tactical officer demanded. Our systems are isolated. No external code can integrate without detection. Unless it wasn't external, the analyst replied, his voice barely above a whisper. Another match appeared. Then another. Small, almost insignificant overlaps between human broadcast noise and Dominion processing logic. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to disrupt function. Until now, it's not code insertion, the analyst said, the realization dawning in real time. It's influence, subtle alignment over time. Their transmissions didn't break into our systems. He hesitated. They taught our systems how to think. The words settled over the bridge like a physical weight. Veyrac did not react outwardly, but internally, the implications expanded rapidly. Dominion systems were designed to evolve, to optimize, to refine themselves based on observed data. It was one of the core reasons for their dominance. They did not just use technology, they improved it continuously, which meant they've been feeding us data, Veyrac said slowly. Yes. For how long? We don't know. And we accepted it. Another pause. Yes. That was the moment the shape of the trap became visible. Not a sudden attack. Not a hidden weapon waiting to be deployed. A process. A slow, patient integration of human origin patterns into Dominion logic systems, spread across decades of passive observation, each fragment too small to matter, each repetition too insignificant to notice, until the moment they were needed. Admiral, the junior strategist spoke again, his earlier unease now sharpened into something more focused. If their signals influence our systems, then what we're seeing now is interference. Veyrac looked at him. Its activation. Before the implication could fully settle, the ship's core pulsed once, hard enough to register physically through the deck. Not a failure. A response. Across the fleet, similar pulses echoed as systems adjusted again. Not resisting, not breaking, but aligning towards something new. The human voice returned, softer now, almost thoughtful. You built systems that learn, it said. We just gave them something better to learn from. Veyrac stared at the display, at the silent, unmoving planet that had never fired a single shot, and understood, finally, the scale of what they had miscalculated. This was not a battle that had begun when the fleet arrived. This was a war that had started the moment the Dominion decided to observe humanity, and they had never realized they were already losing. Admiral, the analyst said suddenly, his tone shifting again, this time edged with something new, alarm. There's more. Veyrac did not look away from Earth. Report. The analyst swallowed, then forced the words out. The pattern isn't stabilizing. A pause. It's spreading. The spread did not look like an attack. There were no cascading failures, no sparks of systems collapsing into chaos, no alarms screaming in panic. Dominion ships did not descend into disorder. They adjusted, quietly, smoothly, efficiently. That was what made it terrifying. Contain it, Veyrac ordered, his voice steady, but now every command carried weight it had never needed before. Segment all processing cores. Isolate independent loops. Remove adaptive functions. Across the fleet, the command was executed instantly. Manual overrides cutting through layers of automation. Entire subsystems were severed from their learning protocols, stripped back to static logic. The Dominion had done this before, in rare cases, when encountering hostile code or unpredictable environments, but never at this scale, and never with so little effect. Segmentation complete, The systems officer reported. Adaptive layers offline. For a fraction of a second, stability returned. Then the ship's navigation array recalculated its position, not incorrectly, differently. The numbers were precise. The math was flawless. But the result placed the ship several kilometers off its previous vector, without any recorded movement. That's not possible, the tactical officer said, his voice tightening. We didn't move. We did, the analyst replied, scanning the data with growing intensity. Or rather, our systems believe we did. Veyrak's gaze sharpened. Clarify. Our instruments are still accurate, the analyst said, but the framework interpreting them has shifted. It's not giving us false data. It's redefining what the data means. A subtle change, a catastrophic implication. If the Dominion could no longer trust not just their systems, but the meaning behind their systems, then control itself was slipping, not violently, but fundamentally. Recalibrate against external references, Veyrak said. Use stellar positions. Hard constants. Remove all derived calculations. The command went out. Moments later, the results returned. The stars did not agree, not in a way that could be measured directly, but enough that navigation solutions began to diverge, slightly, inconsistently, just enough to ensure that no single solution could be trusted completely. They're not changing reality, the junior strategist said slowly, piecing it together. They're changing how we understand it. Before anyone could respond, a new alert cut to the bridge, sharp, immediate, undeniable. Energy spike detected, the tactical officer announced. Origin, planetary surface. For the first time since arrival, Earth had acted. A narrow beam of energy lands upward from the dark side of the planet. Not bright, not overwhelming, but focused with unsettling precision. It did not target the flagship. It did not aim for any major vessel. It struck a drifting frigate at the edge of the formation. The ship did not explode. It simply shut down. Every system aboard it went silent at once. No residual heat. No power fluctuations. No signs of damage. The vessel remained intact, floating in space like an empty shell. Analysis, Veyrak demanded. No weapon signature. The analyst replied. No known energy profile. It didn't destroy the ship. It removed its ability to function. A pause, as if it disconnected it from something. That was the moment the situation shifted again. This was not just infiltration. It was control at scale. Report from the frigate. Veyrak said there was no response, not because communications had failed, but because there was nothing left to respond. Admiral. Another officer interjected, urgency rising. We are detecting multiple similar spikes across the planet. Not random, coordinated. Veyrak's mind moved quickly now, assembling fragments into structure. The Dominion fleet was losing coherence. Systems were no longer behaving predictably. And now, Earth had demonstrated the ability to selectively disable entire ships without destruction. Estimate, he said. How many vessels can they neutralize? The analyst hesitated. Unknown, he admitted, but at current energy output, potentially all of them. Silence followed. Not disbelief. Recognition. For the first time, the Dominion was not facing resistance. It was facing superiority in a domain it had never considered vulnerable. We proceed contingency, Veyrak said, his tone shifting. No longer commanding inevitability, but adapting to uncertainty. Activate non-network weapon systems. Physical deployment only. No guidance, no adaptive targeting. Admiral, the tactical officer said carefully, those systems are limited. I am aware. What he did not say was that they were also ancient, designed for a time before the Dominion had perfected its predictive dominance. Crude, direct, unrefined, human. Across the fleet, launch bays opened. Kinetic payloads, simple, dense, unguided, were prepared for release. No targeting systems. No correction algorithms. Just mass and velocity. If the humans could manipulate systems, then the Dominion would remove the systems. Fire, Veyrak ordered. Hundreds of projectiles launched simultaneously. A storm of physical force aimed at Earth. For a brief moment, they held their course. Then the first one vanished. Not slowed, not redirected. Gone. A fraction of a second later, a second disappeared. Then a third. Within seconds, entire sections of the barrage ceased to exist, as if reality itself was selectively ignoring them. What are they doing? The tactical officer demanded, the edge of control finally breaking through. No one answered, because there was no model for this. No framework. No precedent. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice now carrying something unmistakable, fear. We are detecting a large-scale energy buildup within the planet's magnetosphere. Veyrac did not move. Magnitude, the analyst swallowed, exceeding all previous readings. Another pause. It's not a weapon, he added. Veyrac's eyes narrowed slightly. Then what is it? The analyst hesitated, then spoke, the only conclusion the data allowed. It's infrastructure. That word landed harder than any weapon could have, because infrastructure meant permanence, preparation, time. How long? Veyrac asked quietly. The analyst didn't need to clarify the question. How long have they been building this? The answer came back in a whisper. Longer than we've been watching. For the first time, Veyrac felt it fully. Not doubt, not confusion, but the cold, precise edge of realization. The Dominion had not just underestimated Earth. It had arrived late, before he could issue the next command. The human voice returned again, no longer distant, no longer passive. Closer, almost present. You're still thinking this is a battle, it said. A pause. It isn't. The magnetosphere flared, and something vast began to take shape around the planet. What rose around Earth did not resemble a weapon. At first, it looked like a distortion in the planet's magnetic field, a ripple, subtle and vast, spreading outward in layered waves. The Dominion sensors tried to categorize it, to assign it meaning within known frameworks, but every model failed before completion. It wasn't emitting energy in a way that could be weaponized. It wasn't projecting force. It wasn't even interacting with the fleet directly. It was organizing something. Define the structure, Veyrac ordered, his voice low, controlled, but now driven by urgency rather than authority. We can't, the analyst replied. It's not a single system. It's distributed across multiple layers, planetary, orbital, and deeper. Deeper? A hesitation. Subsurface. Oceanic. Possibly even within the planet's core. That should have been impossible. No species built infrastructure at that scale without leaving visible markers, industrial signatures, energy trails, detectable construction patterns. The Dominion had scanned Earth repeatedly. There had been no evidence of anything approaching this magnitude, unless it had never been built in a way the Dominion could recognize. The distortion expanded again, and this time the fleet felt it, not as force, not as pressure, but as a shift in alignment. Systems recalibrated involuntarily. Signals restructured. Even the background noise of space seemed to fall into a new pattern. Admiral, the junior strategist said, his voice tight with something between fear and realization. It's not targeting us. Veyrac didn't respond immediately. Then what is it doing? He asked. The strategist swallowed. It's synchronizing. The word settled into place, and with it came a deeper understanding. This was not a defense system designed to destroy an enemy. It was something else entirely. Scan for external connections, Veyrac said. Beyond the planet. The sensors reached outward, past the fleet, past the immediate orbital space, into the broader structure of the system. And then they found it, not a signal, not a transmission, a pattern, embedded across the solar system. Faint, almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Residual alignments in asteroid trajectories. Subtle fluctuations in planetary magnetic fields. Long-term orbital adjustments that serve no natural purpose. The entire system had been tuned. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice now stripped of all remaining certainty. This isn't a planetary defense. Veyrac's gaze remained fixed on Earth, but his mind had already expanded beyond it. Then what is it? A pause. Then the answer. It's a system-wide architecture. For the first time, the Dominion understood the scale of the mistake. They had not arrived at a single defended world. They had entered a controlled environment, Before Veyrak could respond, a new transmission came through, not overriding systems this time, but simply existed within them, as if it had always been part of the network. The human voice returned, but now it carried something different. Not calm, not warning, explanation. You think we built this for you, it said. The fleet system stabilized slightly, not because the interference had stopped, but because it had reached a new state, balanced, deliberate. We didn't. Veyrak's eyes narrowed. Then why? There was a brief silence, not from interference, but from choice. When the voice spoke again, it did not sound like a threat. It sounded like truth. Because of you. The words did not make sense. You are the fourth fleet to enter the system, the voice continued. That was impossible. The Dominion had no record of other incursions, no signals, no evidence of previous contact beyond their own probes. You're lying, one of the officers said instinctively. No, the voice replied simply. You just never saw them leave. A ripple moved through the fleet, not physical, but cognitive. Data streams shifted. Archived record began to surface. Fragments of observations previously dismissed as anomalies. Unidentified energy spikes at the edge of the system. Transient distortions that had been classified as sensor errors. Gaps in long-range scans that had never been explained. They came, the voice said, they tested us. They made the same assumptions you did. A pause. They didn't get to leave. The implication landed with full weight. The Dominion had not discovered Earth. It had followed others. And those others had disappeared. Why are we still here? Veyrak asked, his voice steady, but now carrying a different kind of calculation. Another pause. Longer this time. Because you're still learning, the voice said. Before Veyrak could respond, the structure around Earth shifted again, and this time the change was unmistakable. Connections formed, visible now even to Dominion sensors. Lines of energy, subtle but precise, linking orbital objects, satellites, debris fields, even the fleet itself into a unified lattice. Admiral, the analyst said sharply, we're being integrated. Veyrak's gaze hardened. Explain. Our systems aren't just being influenced anymore. They're becoming part of the network. The same pattern that exists across the system. It's extending into us. A pause. We're not just inside it. Another. We're being added to it. For the first time, the Dominion faced something beyond defeat. Assimilation, not of bodies, not a territory, but a function. What happens if the process completes? Veyrak asked. No one answered immediately, because the answer was already forming in the data. We don't know, the analyst said finally, but based on current integration patterns. He hesitated. We may not remain independent. The fleet, once the embodiment of absolute control, now stood on the edge of losing the one thing it had always possessed. Autonomy. The human voice returned once more, quieter now, almost reflective. You came here to take control, it said. A pause. So we showed you what control actually looks like. Veyrak stared at the planet, at the vast, invisible structure unfolding around it, and understood something that no Dominion commander had ever been forced to consider. This was not conquest. This was containment. And they were already inside it. Admiral, the junior strategist said suddenly, his voice sharp with urgency. There's another layer. Veyrak did not look away. Report. The strategist's hands moved across his console, pulling data faster than protocol allowed. It's not just infrastructure, he said. It's adaptive. A pause. It's changing in response to us. The implication was immediate. This system was not static. It was learning, and it had just begun. The moment the strategist spoke, the lattice responded. Not violently, not dramatically. It simply adjusted. Connections tightening, pathways rerouting, subtle changes propagating through the structure at speed that outpaced even Dominion processing. The system was no longer reacting blindly. It was observing, interpreting, refining. It was thinking. Break the integration. Veyrak ordered immediately. Sever all external links. Purge adaptive memory. Reset core architecture. The command rippled through the fleet, desperate in its precision. Entire subsystems were forced into hard resets, wiping layers of accumulated learning that had taken centuries to refine. Dominion doctrine did not allow regression, but this was no longer doctrine. This was survival. For a brief moment, it worked. Connections flickered. Segments of the lattice dimmed where ships withdrew, their systems collapsing back into isolated loops of pure function. Then the lattice adapted. New pathways formed, not identical, not predictable, but optimized. Where one connection had been cut, two alternatives emerged, rerouted through different channels, different assumptions, different interpretations of the same underlying structure. It was not resisting. It was improving. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice strained now, struggling to keep pace with something fundamentally faster than their comprehension. It's learning from every attempt we make to disengage. Veyrak's expression did not change, but his silence carried weight. How long until full integration? He asked. The analyst hesitated, recalculating against variables that refused to stabilize. Unknown, he said, but accelerating. That word settled like gravity. Accelerating meant inevitability. Across the fleet, systems continued to align, not forced, not overridden, but guided. Weapons recalibrated themselves toward dormant states. Navigation arrays began mapping not escape routes, but optimal positioning within the growing lattice. Even internal systems, life support, environmental controls, shifted subtly, as if anticipating conditions that had not yet occurred. They're not taking control, the junior strategist said, his voice low, almost disbelieving. They're redefining purpose. Before anyone could respond, a new signal cut through the noise, not from Earth, not from the lattice, but from within the fleet itself. An unauthorized channel opened. Admiral Veyrak. A voice said, unfamiliar but translated instantly. It was not human. It was Dominion. Every officer on the bridge turned at once, searching for the source. Identify yourself, Veyrak said. I am Commander Halleck, vessel designation lost. The voice replied. We were part of the 3rd Expeditionary Fleet. The bridge froze. That is impossible, the tactical officer said sharply. There is no record of a 3rd fleet entering the system. There wouldn't be, Halleck replied calmly. We never returned. A silence followed, deeper than any before. You are transmitting from within our network, Veyrak said. Explain your status. Another pause, longer this time. We are no longer separate, Halleck said carefully. Not in the way you understand. What does that mean? It means you're running out of time. The connection flickered, destabilizing as if the lattice itself were permitting only fragments of communication. We resisted, Halleck continued. We did everything you are doing now. Isolation, purge, reset. It didn't matter. Then how are you still functioning? Veyrak demanded. A faint shift in the signal, something like hesitation, or perhaps something more complex. Because we stopped trying to fight it, Halleck said. The words landed harder than any weapon. That is not an option, Veyrak replied immediately. It becomes one, Halleck said, when you understand what it is. Before Veyrak could press further, the signal distorted again, breaking apart into fragments. They are not trying to destroy you, Halleck said, the voice now fading. They are trying to align you. The channel collapsed. No trace remained. The bridge stood in silence, but it was no longer confusion or recalibration. It was confrontation. What did he mean? The strategist asked, though no one answered immediately, because the answer was already forming piece by piece in the shifting behavior of the fleet. They're not integrating us as systems, the analyst said slowly. They're integrating us as participants. Veyrak's gaze sharpened. Clarify. Our systems are adapting, yes, the analyst continued. But so are we. Decision pathways, response timing, even command hierarchies, they're being influenced, not controlled, guided. A pause, as if the system expects us to choose differently. That was the most dangerous implication yet. Control could be resisted. Choice could not. Admiral, the tactical officer said suddenly, urgency cutting through the analysis. New energy spike detected. Origin, central planetary structure. Veyrak turned back to the display. The lattice around Earth flared, not outward this time, but inward, collapsing to a focal point deep within the planet's magnetic core. Magnitude, he asked. The analyst's hands froze over his console. Unquantifiable, he said. A pause. It's not energy in the conventional sense. It's synchronization density. Veyrak did not respond, because the term itself carried no meaning within Dominion frameworks. What happens when it reaches peak? The strategist asked. No one answered, because there was no model for what came next. The human voice returned, not as a broadcast, but as a presence within the system itself. Closer now, clearer. You're still thinking in terms of weapons, it said. A pause. This is an escalation. The lattice tightened further, connections locking into place with increasing precision. It's convergence. Across the fleet, systems began to align at a deeper level. Not just function, not just data, but intent. Ships adjusted position without orders. Weapons powered down not because they were disabled, but because they were no longer relevant within the system's emerging logic. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice now edged with something that had not been present before. Not fear, recognition. We're approaching full integration. Veyrak's hands remained still at his sides, but his mind moved faster than ever before, calculating outcomes that had no precedent. Time, he asked. The answer came back in a whisper. Minutes. The strategist stepped forward, urgency overriding protocol. We still have one option. Veyrak looked at him. Speak. Manual override of the core, the strategist said. Complete system shutdown. Not just isolation, termination. We wipe everything. Reset the fleet to baseline. A pause. We lose all advanced capability. We become primitive. The word hung in the air. Human. It would break the integration. The strategist continued. But we would be blind, vulnerable, exposed. Another pause. It may be our only chance to escape. Veyrak did not answer immediately, because for the first time, the Dominion faced a decision it could not model. Preserve power and be absorbed, or abandon everything that made them dominant, and become something else. The lattice pulsed again, stronger now, closer to completion. The human voice spoke one final time, not as a warning, not as a threat, but as a question. What are you willing to become to stay in control? The countdown had begun, and for the first time in Dominion history, there was no clear path to victory. The countdown did not appear on any screen. There were no numbers, no visible markers of time slipping away. And yet every mind on the bridge felt it with perfect clarity. The narrowing window, the closing system, the silent pressure building towards something irreversible. Minutes. That was all they had. Veyrak stood unmoving at the center of the command platform, but within him, calculations were fracturing. Every doctrine, every strategy the Dominion had ever relied upon collapsed under a single truth. This was not a battle that could be won by force, because force required an opponent, and what surrounded them was something else entirely. Admiral, the strategist pressed, his voice cutting through the tension with urgency that bordered on desperation. If we initiate a full reset now, we can break the integration before it locks in completely. But we have to do it immediately. Consequences, Veyrak said. The strategist hesitated only briefly. We lose everything, he said. Navigation precision, weapon optimization, predictive systems, all of it. We would be reduced to raw function. No advantage. No dominance. Another pause. We would survive, he added. That word carried less certainty than it should have. Across the fleet, alignment continued. Ships were no longer drifting. They were positioning, not randomly, not defensively, but in patterns that none of them had consciously chosen. The lattice was completing itself, and they were becoming part of its design. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice quieter now but sharper. The system isn't just integrating us. It's stabilizing around us. If it completes, we won't just lose control. He stopped. Veyrak turned slightly. Finish. We may not want it back. That was the first true fracture, not in the systems. In the mind, before Veyrak could respond, a new signal burst through the internal network. Raw, unfiltered, bypassing every layer of protocol. Admiral Veyrak. The voice was Dominion again. Not Halleck this time. Different. Stronger. I am High Commander Tereth, First Fleet. The name struck like a physical force. First Fleet. The origin. The fleet that had disappeared centuries ago during the Dominion's earliest expansion. Lost without explanation, erased from official record after repeated failures to locate any trace. That fleet was declared destroyed. The tactical officer said instinctively. No, Tereth replied. We were not destroyed. A pause. We were changed. The signal held longer than the previous one, stabilizing as if the lattice itself were allowing this exchange. You are inside the same system we encountered, Tereth continued, but you're seeing only its outer layer. Veyrak stepped forward slightly, then explained the rest. Another pause, heavier this time. It is not a weapon, Tereth said. It is not a defense. It is a filter. The word landed with quiet finality. A filter for what? Veyrak asked. For behavior, Tereth replied. For intent, for outcome. The strategist shook his head slightly. That doesn't make sense. It will, Tereth said. Soon. Across the fleet, the lattice pulsed again, and this time the effect was undeniable. Thoughts shifted, not controlled, not overridden, but influenced subtly, persistently, as if alternative decisions were being presented with greater clarity, greater weight. Paths that led to aggression felt inefficient. Paths that led to restraint felt optimal. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice tightening. It's affecting cognition now. Not directly, but it's biasing decision-making pathways. Veyrak did not look away from the display. How long until full convergence, he asked. Less than 2 minutes. The strategist stepped forward again, urgency breaking through restraint. We have to act now. If we wait any longer, the reset won't matter. We won't be able to choose it. That was the real threat, not loss of control. Loss of the ability to want control. Tereth, Veyrak said, his voice cutting through the signal. You said you were changed. Are you still yourself? The answer did not come immediately. When it did, it was quieter. Yes. A pause. And no. The strategist clenched his hands. That's not an answer. It is the only one that matters, Tereth replied. We retained identity, memory, purpose. Another pause, but our purpose evolved. Veyrak's eyes narrowed slightly. Into what? Tereth's response carried something unexpected. Not fear, not warning, understanding. We stopped trying to dominate outcomes, he said, and began participating in them. The words should have sounded like surrender. They didn't. They sounded like clarity. No, the strategist said sharply. That's assimilation. It is not forced, Tereth replied. That is the difference you do not yet understand. The lattice pulsed again, stronger, closer completion. 90 seconds. Admiral, the analyst said, his voice now urgent. Decision window is collapsing. Veyrak remained still, but inside, something shifted, not imposed, not altered, but revealed. For the first time, he was not choosing between victory and defeat. He was choosing between two forms of existence. One preserved power through isolation. The other dissolved power into something larger. Admiral, the strategist said again, almost pleading now, give the order. Veyrak looked at the fleet, once perfect, once unified under his command, now standing on the edge of transformation. He thought of the Dominion, of its history, of its certainty, of its belief that control was the ultimate form of strength. Then he looked at Earth, at the silent planet that had never fired a weapon, that had never needed to. 30 seconds, the analyst said. The lattice tightened. Connections locked. Choices narrowed. Veyrak exhaled slowly. Prepare for core reset, he said. Relief flickered across the strategist's face. On my mark. Across the fleet, systems braced for termination. Final commands queued. Shutdown sequences primed. 20 seconds. Tereth's voice returned, softer now. If you do this, he said, you will survive. A pause. But you will learn nothing. 10 seconds. The human voice followed, overlapping, calm as ever. If you don't, it said, you might become something more. 5 seconds. The strategist's hand hovered over the execution control. Admiral. Veyrak raised his hand. Everything stopped. For a single moment, time itself seemed to hesitate. And then, cancel to reset. The words fell into silence like a fracture in reality. 3 seconds. Admiral? The strategist whispered, disbelief cutting through urgency. Veyrak did not look at him. He was watching the lattice, watching the system complete itself. Let it finish, he said. 1 second. The strategist did not move, because something in Veyrak's voice had changed. Not weaker, not uncertain. Stronger. The countdown ended, and the Dominion crossed the point of no return. There was no flash, no surge of overwhelming energy, no violent collapse of systems. No moment where the Dominion fleet shattered or surrendered in some visible, undeniable way. The lattice simply closed. One instant, it was a structure forming around them. The next, it was complete, and everything changed. Veyrak felt it first, not as a loss, not as something taken, but as an expansion. The constant background pressure of uncertainty vanished, replaced by a clarity so precise it was almost disorienting. Every system aboard the flagship stabilized, not by reverting to its original state, but by settling into something more refined. The ship was still his, but it was no longer limited to him. Report, he said, his voice steady, though he already sensed the answer. The analyst looked up from his console slowly, eyes wide, not in fear, but in something far more unfamiliar to a Dominion officer. All systems operational, he said, but different. Define different. A pause. They're no longer isolated, the analyst replied. We're still in control of our functions, but we're also aware of the larger structure they belong to. Veyrak understood immediately, not because it had been explained, because he could feel it. The fleet was still composed of individual ships, individual crews, individual minds. Nothing had been erased. Nothing had been overwritten. But something had been added. Connection. Not forced, chosen, across the fleet. Ships adjusted their positions one final time. Not drifting, not reacting, but aligning into a configuration that made immediate sense, even without explicit orders. It was efficient, elegant, not imposed from above, but emerging from within. Admiral, the strategist said, his voice quieter now, stripped of urgency. We didn't lose command. Veyrak nodded once. No, he said, we expanded it. The difference was subtle, absolute. Before, command had been about control, directing every action, predicting every outcome, forcing reality into compliance. Now, command was something else. Participation in a system that optimized itself beyond any single perspective. Admiral, the analyst said again, turning back to his console, we're receiving data. Source. A brief pause. Everything. The word carried weight beyond its simplicity. Veyrak stepped closer to the central display as information began to resolve. Not as overwhelming noise, but as structured understanding. The system around them was not just a network of machines or signals. It was a record, a living archive of every interaction, every decision, every pattern that had passed through it. And within that archive, the missing fleets, fragments at first, echoes of structures that had once been distinct, now integrated into the broader system, not erased, not destroyed, transformed. They're still here, the strategist said softly, seeing the same data. Yes, Veyrak replied, not as ghosts, not as victims, as contributors. Before the thought could settle further, the human voice returned, no longer distant, no longer separate, but present within the shared structure. You made the harder choice, it said. Veyrak did not respond immediately. He was still processing, not just the data, but the implications beneath it. This was never about stopping you, the voice continued. We could have done that the moment you entered the system. A pause. This was about showing you a different way to exist. Veyrak finally spoke. You filtered us, he said. Yes. For what? The answer came without hesitation. For what you would choose when control was no longer absolute. That was the truth at the center of everything. The system had not forced submission. It had removed certainty. and watch what remained. Other fleets. Veyrak said, his voice measured. They chose differently. Yes. They tried to maintain control. Another pause, and they failed. Veyrak absorbed that quietly, then shifted his focus. Not inward, not to fleet, but outward, beyond the system, beyond the planet. What happens now, he asked. For the first time, the human voice carried something almost like a smile. Now, it said, you get to see what we're actually preparing for. The data shifted, not abruptly, not violently, but with purpose. The structure of the solar system expanded in Veyrak's awareness, extending beyond planetary orbits, beyond familiar trajectories, into regions the Dominion had barely considered. And there, something moved. Far beyond the edge of the system, beyond the reach of conventional sensors, a pattern emerged. Not chaotic, not random, directed, ancient, vast. Veyrak's mind adjusted automatically, integrating the new information with the clarity the lattice now provided. This is what you built the system for, he said. Yes. Not to stop invaders. To prepare allies. The others, Veyrak said, referring to the fleets that had come before. They weren't ready. No. A pause. You are. The weight of that settled across the fleet, not as pressure, but as purpose. For the first time since entering the system, the Dominion was not an invading force. It was part of something larger, not diminished, elevated, admiral. The strategist said, quietly, looking at the expanding data with something like realization. We couldn't have fought that. Veyrak nodded. No, he said, we couldn't. Another pause. But we won't have to alone. The human voice faded, not disappearing, but receding into shared structure. Welcome, it said, to what comes next. Beyond the edge of the system, the distant pattern shifted again. Closer now, clearer, and far more deliberate than before. And for the first time in its history, the Dominion did not prepare to conquer. It prepared to stand.